Good morning, Redeemer. I'm Carl Santos, pastor here at Redeemer Church in Niagara Falls. Glad to have you here on this Holy Week devotion, and today we are looking at one of my favorite words or names for a Holy Week day. Wednesday is often called Spy Wednesday. And if you have been around the faith long enough, you probably know why it's called Spy Wednesday, referring to Judas. But either way, let's look at this incredible passage that comes to us again from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 14, verses 1 to 10. It was now 2 days before the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to arrest him by stealth and kill him. For they said, "Not during the feast, lest there be an uproar from the people." And while he was in Bethany, in the house of Simon the leper, as he was reclining at table, a woman came with an alabaster flask of ointment of pure nard, very costly, and she broke the flask and poured it over his head. There were some who said to themselves indignantly, "Why was the ointment wasted like that? For this ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor." And they scolded her. But Jesus said, "Leave her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. For you always have the poor with you, and whenever you want, you can do good for them. But you will not always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for burial. And truly I say to you, whenever the gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in memory of her." Then Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12, went to the chief priests in order to betray him to them. Wednesday. Tuesday was a busy day. Remember, I recounted a little bit of what happened on Holy Tuesday. Such a busy and hectic day that on Wednesday you find it's conspicuously quiet. It's like in those movies when they say things are quiet and somebody inevitably says, "too quiet." Well, it's kind of the feeling you get on Spy Wednesday, that everything after this triumphal entry and the cleansing of the temple and all the debates and confrontations, you expected the crescendo to come soon, right? You expect the tension to continue to build. And although it does build, it happens very differently. In the ancient world, it was assumed that when great men were being killed or were to die, that the heavens would rebel. So by chance, when Julius Caesar died, there was a comet that streaked through the air, and people thought it was an omen. And in fact, even in Macbeth, in Shakespeare's Macbeth, when Macbeth kills the king, Duncan of Scotland, there's two men talking the day after, and they're recounting how the night before was so tremulous that the earth was in a fever and did shake, and that the horses ate each other, and all nature becomes unhinged because this unnatural act happened. So you would expect something like that in the ancient world, but the gospel writers don't record that. Instead, on Wednesday, on Spy Wednesday, all of the conspiring and the betrayal and the downfall that is being engineered of Jesus in his life here is being done in shadows and whispers. It's not happening with great tumult. So, one of the things I find, before I move on, what is happening here Wednesday is the beginning of the abandonment of Jesus. The Gospel of Mark specifically will say that at the end, on the cross, Christ is abandoned and alone on the cross. Other Gospel writers will have other people there with him, women, John, and so on. But Mark says that they've all abandoned him. Mark wants to make it clear that Christ faces the cross alone, fully abandoned by God, man, and the world. And the abandonment begins here with Judas betraying him as he sneaks out of the door at night. But one of the things I find most interesting is in this passage, and I'll be as brief as I can, is the question of cost is riddled all through this passage. So Mary is there, or the woman who anoints his head. And this woman, she seems to think that worship is worthy of any cost. It's worth any cost. It's worth spending everything on, because she takes this incredibly valuable thing and pours it out on Christ. So to her, the cost is irrelevant because nothing is more important than worship. To Jesus, of course. And then, by the way, the woman's transaction is what happens when you become a Christian. Transactions become silly. You begin to give up a previous life and accolades and ego and wealth and positions and status for the sake of following this carpenter. And everything looks topsy-turvy to the world, and this woman shows that. But then Jesus comes as well, and he sees how worship benefits you and I. And as a result, he thinks there is no cost too high to pay. In fact, he'll even say things like, as we saw in the Sermon on the Mount series, you cut off your hand, gouge out your eye if you have to, take drastic measures to root out sin from your life. Because he thinks honoring God, worshiping God, obeying God is worth any cost, much like the woman. Then we have Judas. Of course, we know to Judas, who values money, the cost of worship is always going to be too high. In fact, the cost of everything will be too high. He, in other Gospels, is the one who under his breath is causing trouble and saying, what's going on? Why is she spending the money like this? We could have spent it better. Because to Judas, worship is too expensive. And then we have the leaders who are there as well. And the leaders have a cost-benefit analysis going on too. But for the leaders in Jerusalem, what we're finding amongst the Pharisees and the scribes is that they think that their position and status is worth any cost to maintain. So they'll do anything to maintain their situation in their culture, even if it means putting to death an innocent man who they think it's just a man. But we all, of course, know that it's the Son of God. So everybody has a cost in their head. And of course, we have God here. God values our worship so entirely, and he sees it as so beautiful, even though it's imperfect. He sees the worship of this woman who we know, depending on the traditions, was a sinner. We're all sinners. And he values it so highly that he'll even give up himself for it. Money, and then this woman, you know what it's with this idea of beauty. Do you notice Jesus says, she has done a beautiful thing for me? Consider what she's done. A woman who is in that culture couldn't just throw away this kind of money. So when she gives away money, what she's giving away is security. She's giving away opportunity in her culture, which means that if she gives it all to God, then she is going to have to trust God to protect her and to deliver her. And that is worship, and God sees that as beautiful. Imperfect as it is, he sees it as beautiful. So do you see, there's a cost theme running through this passage. And for us, the question is, how do we value him? What is our currency? What is the currency of not just our culture, but you specifically? For me, for instance, is my time. I'm a guy who is prone to seeing his life as very structured. And if something infringes on my schedule, I can very easily get frustrated. That's a sin in me because I feel like my time is mine. And when I go bad, that's where I go bad. I start to become resentful when my time is forced to be doing things that I haven't planned for it to do. That's what I value. And as a result, I have to continually work to lay it down before God, because that is the pure nard for me. That is the money to me. Time is my currency. And what is it for you? What is it for you that on this Spy Wednesday is that thing that you think, occasionally you think it's too high a cost to give up for Christ? And I know that sounds harsh. As Christians, you don't want to think you think that, but we do. Every time we choose something other than Christ, we are saying that the cost isn't worth it. So let's reflect on that. That Judas did something terrible, but he did it as man, representing man, humanity, us. Let's reflect on that and the cost of worshiping our mighty and wonderful Savior. Thank you for joining me. Tune in tomorrow for Thursday. Have a great day.